What's up, guys? In this video, we're going to be diving into the thin wrapper API functions for processing JSON data within the maci library. Now, this is going to be the first video to kick off talking about all the thin wrapper access within the maci library, but I'm also going to use this video to lightly answer what is a thin wrapper if you're wondering. Just to give a simple understanding, a thin wrapper just gives a thin amount of access to something to abstract the need to expose the deeper details or complexity. So in other words, instead of having someone trying to understand the deep underlying details or complex systems of something, you can provide thin access to it to make it easy to interface and use it accordingly. Especially when you're just trying to use the simple or common functionality that doesn't need the deeper understanding behind the scenes. So hopefully that makes sense. And now let's jump into the thin functions for JSON and how to use it. So the first one we're going to start out with is the load function, which allows you to load JSON data from your JSON file. As you can see, we have a mygame.json file, which has pretty much the same data that we had before in our mygame.save file that we've been using throughout the series, but of course it's structured in JSON using JSON language. So, in order to access the JSON functions, you simply just need to type maci.json, and everything is conveniently grouped together so you can easily discover all the JSON related functions. So first we'll start off with load. Now I want to give credit where credit is due, but also expose the reason why it's called a thin API function. And that's because the thin API functions used for the maci library that enable JSON functionality use and wrap the native JSON library that is actually shipped with the Python standard library for its underlying functionality. So really, under the hood, it's using the well-known JSON library that ships with the Python standard library. Hence why it's called a thin access or a thin wrapper, where the maci JSON functions are actually just providing thinner access to the real JSON library under the hood. And you could say it makes you lazier because you could just create the JSON functionality yourself, but that's why we have abstraction, which helps improve development time. And if we hover over this, we can see the only required argument is a file name. We're not going to talk about encoding. As I've mentioned throughout the series, if you already understand what encoding is, then you know what to do with it. But if not, definitely look it up and try to understand it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a quick variable called file name. Call it mygame.json. I'm going to pass that variable in. I didn't have to create a variable, but I wanted to. And now, let me go ahead and print this out. And we should see our JSON data imported and returned as the corresponding data type. And you see it actually might return multiple data types. If you only had like a string in the file or an integer, it actually would return just the string or the integer. But in this example, we have the full JSON object, which will be converted into a Python dictionary. So if I run this, now you see it was easily imported and converted to the correct matching Python data type, which in this case is a Python dictionary. And that's it. That's how simple it is to load a JSON file using the maci library to get your JSON data. Now you see how easy and convenient that was. Wasn't hard at all. Of course, using the native JSON library within Python standard library is still really easy to do. But this eliminates the need to re-implement file handling operations, especially in this example, for processing JSON. Alright, so now let's see how to load JSON data from a string. I've gone ahead and created a multi-line string in Python that contains string data formatted in JSON. And all I really did was copy from the file and paste it in here, but I only captured the first 5 key names, which was the username all the way to items. Anyways, if we want to load this data from a string, we simply just use the load string function. But if we hover over this, there's only one parameter that we need to pass an argument to, and that's the JSON string data. So all I'm going to do is just remove this name, because we commented out the file name for now, and we're just going to grab that variable called string data. And now if I print this and run it, we'll see it gets converted to the corresponding Python dictionary that matches the JSON data. Hopefully that makes sense, but that's how easy it is to load JSON data from a string. Alright, now we'll go ahead and talk about dumping your Python data into a JSON file. So I've gone ahead and uncommented the file name and created a new file name, which is just mygame_2.json. And we're going to be storing this Python dictionary data, which is pretty much the same data we had. And then we're going to dump it to a new file called mygame_2.json. But once it's dumped to the file, it's going to be automatically converted to JSON format. So all we need to do is just write out JSON dump. And we'll take our new variable and we'll pass in the file name variable and pass in our dictionary data. And so if we hover over this, we can see that it accepts two required parameters, which is file name and data. And I forgot to mention this before, but for your file names, you can either pass in a string or a path object. If you're not sure what a path object is, please look up the pathlib library on Python's official documentation site. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the print function because dump does not return anything. It's just going to create a new file and dump the dictionary data. So we go ahead and run this. We'll see a new file was created called mygame_2.json, and there's our JSON data. Now let's go ahead and check out some of the additional options in the parameters here. We also see an append option. So if we wanted to, we can actually append data to a file just by ticking this append switch. So let's go ahead and check that out just for demonstration purposes. We'll go ahead and just use the same data. And so if I run this, actually let me bring the file over to the side here just so you can see it live. So if I run this, you'll see the data gets appended at the end of the file. Now you probably noticed that this is actually improper JSON syntax, and you may never reach a case where you need to append more data to a JSON file, but it all depends on your case. Maybe you're just appending JSON data to a plain text file and you're just trying to collect a lot of data. Or maybe there is a half-written file that needs JSON data appended to it. I don't know, but the ability is there in case you need it. All right, let's see what other options we have here. You can also change the indent level. Let's go ahead and remove our appended data and just stick with the basic data we have there. And let's talk about the indent level. So by default, the indent level is 4. And so we see it right here. 4 means 4 actual spaces. So if we actually change this to 1, we'll actually run this, and we see it only gets 1 space of indentation. The default is 4, which is pretty standard when indenting your JSON data. Now you might be wondering, if you've watched a lot of the series and encountered some of the maci indentation, you know that when maci indents, 1 level equals 4 spaces automatically. However, you have to remember that this is a thin wrapper function. And so the API is exposing some of the functionality with the true underlying function, which is the JSON library from the Python standard library. And within the Python standard library version of it, it actually allows you to change the indent level at small incremental levels like this. So that functionality is retained within the thin wrapper, but of course it's giving you thin access to that functionality. So hopefully that makes sense. So again, like I've mentioned throughout the video series, I'm not going to go into encoding. Definitely look it up if you want to understand it more, if you don't understand it already. Now the last thing I want to talk about is dumping your data to a string. So let's see how to do so. Okay, so now if you want to dump your Python data to a JSON formatted string, you simply just need to do dump str. But if we hover over this, all it's expecting is just the data, of course, no file involved. And so let me go ahead and just remove this. And like it says, it's going to dump the data to a string. Let's go ahead and bring our print function back. And if we run this, we should see our Python data converted into a JSON formatted string output. So if I run this, there it is. One way you can tell is that the Boolean value, which was uppercase in Python, is actually lowercase in here. And the rest pretty much looks the same, but now it's formatted in JSON. But now let's see what other options are available. The only other option available is just to change the indent level. So if I just change the indent level real quick, if I change it to a 1, for example, you'll see you'll just have one space of indentation within your JSON data, but the default is 4, which is typical for most output. That's going to go ahead and wrap up this video on the thin wrapper function for the JSON library within maci. Thank you so much for watching, and take care.